Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Startup Boston podcast. I'm your host, Nick Dupuy. The Startup Boston podcast takes you inside the world of Boston startups, featuring interviews with Boston-based entrepreneurs, investors, and influencers. During each episode, someone involved with Boston startups will share their experience, advice, thoughts, predictions, and challenges with listeners. No industry or topic is off limits as guests share their first-hand experience. Guests range from Kickstarter successes to angel investors and venture capitalists to SaaS founders to product team experts and beyond. I believe that each person has a story to tell, and we each can learn something from the experience of others. Whether you are a founder, work at a startup, are an investor, interested in joining a startup, or are just curious about startups, you will find something here for you. This podcast is an attempt to help share those stories. This is the first episode, and it's different than the rest of the podcast episodes. Normally, for each episode, I interview someone. However, today is kind of like a teaser episode or a trailer episode, where I've taken about a minute or so some of my favorite pieces from each of the first 15 episodes and put them together. Going forward for the next 8 weeks, I'm going to release 2 to 3 episodes every week, and each episode is roughly 30 minutes to an hour, and after those 8 weeks, I'll be releasing 1 episode every week. Now, you may be wondering why I'm releasing so many episodes in the first 8 weeks. One reason is to push out content and make it so that you have more episodes to listen to. The other, honestly, is because of the way iTunes ranks podcasts in the new and noteworthy section of iTunes. I won't go into detail, but download numbers in the previous 24 hours and total subscribers plays a huge role. That being said, if you enjoyed today's episode and want to listen to my other episodes, make sure you subscribe on iTunes. You can find all show notes for the podcast at startupbostonpodcast.com, and if you have any feedback, ideas for guests, or just want to say hi, you can reach me at nick@startupbostonpodcast.com. That's NIC@startupbostonpodcast.com. Lastly, feel free to follow the podcast on Twitter at StartupBossCast. That's Startup BOS Cast. Before we get going, I first need to say a huge thank you to all 23 people who have recorded an episode with me and everyone else who has agreed to an interview. It really means so much to me that you've allowed me, someone you didn't know, and someone who had no previous podcast content for you to listen to interview you. It means a lot to me, and this podcast wouldn't be possible if it weren't for you. Now, without any further ado, I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
I kid you not, our goal was, all right, we can make some bars and we're going to sell them to Shaw's, because Shaw's was like the major, grocery store right down the road. And we're like, oh yeah, we'll get, no problem. We're going to make some bars and we'll sell it. And it took us a year and a half to actually get there, because there's just so much that goes into it. And it's really given me such a huge appreciation for whenever you go into a grocery store, you walk down an aisle and you see 100, 200 different products, right? In each aisle. And you don't really realize how much work went to get every single one of those products on the shelves, like the number of hands that touch, just from making that packaging, right? The vendor, the company that made the packaging, then it had to be shipped to the manufacturing facility. Then you have all those hands making the product, right? And then you have the hands that are putting the product into that box. And then you have the truck drivers who are driving it from the manufacturing facility to the distribution center. So it's just so many touch points that you never really think about.
It should be clear that the point of raising money is not to raise money, it's just to get a great company. And if you can get a great company,
right, it's just the beginning.
If your company is great, it will raise money. If you can get great people, you will raise money. Just being good means that there's that credibility and there's other things. It's more important to get traction, to get customers, to get, breakthroughs or doing whatever than anything else. So if someone's got a great idea, buddy, I've seen that same idea 20 times. Mm-hmm. Why you? But you can say, I've done the idea and I interviewed these 15 people and I've got letters of intent and here's the name of the reference you can call and here's my prototype, and you can do it.
Most companies have evolved to have a recruiting process that really focuses on eliminating bad candidates instead of attracting good candidates. So, for example, if a company is getting 100 resumes a week, and they're only going to end up hiring 1 out of those 100, most processes at companies are built to get rid of the 99 as fast as possible, right? And what that does is that each of those 99 people get an experience that's negative. Whereas what you should be doing is treating every single candidate as though they're your next hire, right? So I think in a nutshell, that's probably the spirit that most companies get wrong. And it's not intentional. It's mostly because of the way that their workloads are structured, right? Yeah. If you have to go through 100 resumes, you end up focusing on that, even if you try not to.
I think there's a lot to be learned from doing rather than listening and learning. I think there has to be a balance. And one of the things, and I know there's a lot of, and Boston's probably it's an interesting city in terms of that, where people have tick boxes of, I've gone to this school, I've done this MBA, I've worked at this office, I've started this company, I've sold this company, I've now restarted the second company, where it's kind of like a rite of passage. I think if I was 25 today, I would say take more chances. It's okay. No one's left out on the streets. Like you're smart people, you will find a way. So it's okay to take a few more chances. I think I took, at 25, I was so into my career that I thought that I was holding up the bank with my work. Like the share price would fall if I didn't go to work the next day. So I kind of think, don't take yourself so seriously in terms of your work. Do take your work seriously, but it's not the only thing you need to take seriously. I think have experiences by meeting people in different countries, different cultures. So work in different places like I'm doing now, because I've learned more in the last 6 months than I had in the last 3 years. And that's kind of interesting.
And even for the first couple of years of starting AppKeys, I took everything really seriously. And it was I never really thought about just like enjoying life, having fun. Or I did in like weird ways, like sort of like thought fun only came if you worked hard. And now I think that they really should go hand in hand. Like if you are working hard, like that should be really fun. And if it's not, it's because the work that you're doing sucks and you shouldn't be doing it. You should be doing something that you do find fun. So yeah, I would say like have more fun.
Not a great process guy. So I love to create. I love to inspire. I love to think about new ideas and try to drive change in that manner. But I think as the company has grown from really just me to now we've got north of 20 full-time employees, and we've got a lot of other external partners. We've reached a point where having a substantial amount of structure in place and process is very helpful to our growth. And I've been able to attract, colleagues of mine to then fill that role. So it's knowing that about yourself is, a first part. So it lets me sort of focus on the areas that I love and the things that I think I do well that are unique to me, and then fill in the gaps with a lot of other great, talented people.
When you get beyond the sort of basement startup or garage startup, then it just becomes about putting the right people in the right seats. So I've gained a lot more respect for the people that I know who have done that time and time again. I guess other surprises. I mean, I think call this a surprise or a challenge, but I think like one of the things that's interesting to me is how many decisions you have to make that are related to whether or not you do what's been proven to be an excellent strategy or you disrupt, right? So like one of the things that's really interesting to me is like the best strategy for a startup, particularly in a business like ours, which is like kind of an old school business, is like we need to know that, we need to know in the supply chain when to adopt best strategies, best practices. We need to know when to say, yeah, but that only got them this far, so let's try this different strategy. That's been like an interesting thing, like knowing when those decisions should take place.
Big mistake that advertisers make is that they don't understand the power of targeting well enough. That they don't understand, what wealth of information we actually have to get targeted to their consumers.
Do they just try and go too broad?
Yeah, they go too broad, or they use very simplistic things like targeting 18 to 54-year-old women. Well, what do you want those women to be interested in? Where do you want them to be geographically? Like, where are your best customers? That's another thing. And then the third thing, which is massive, is that they don't have good video assets, right? If you just repurpose what you use on television, that might be okay, but you have to understand that that these online digital assets often need to be created for the environment that they're going to run in. And you know this as well as I do. If an ad runs on Facebook, oftentimes it will run without sound. So you need something that works without sound. On YouTube, people like things that are more explanatory or that go more into depth oftentimes and give them information that are kind of cool, or maybe using celebrities, right? On television, yes, you might have celebrities, but it's often much too short and also doesn't present people with a call to action oftentimes, right? Except if you're doing direct response advertising on some cable channels. But the creative asset is really important, and we can do all of the optimization that we want. If your asset is crappy, then it's going to, with that I mean your video that you're showing, your video ad, it's just, we can help, but not as much as we could. So if you had a really good targeted video that spoke to your target audience.
I mean, functionality comes after it's pleasing to the eye, right? So there's some amazing apps out there that at first probably started with a really, really deep functionality standpoint, and then they needed to create a nice UI. For me, and I'm sure for you too, like, it really matters kind of like what that first screen is to you.
Yeah.
And that first initial impact of what is this? And if people need to like fill out forms and like, give your firstborn to sign up for an app, they're not going to do it.
Yeah. Just close it.
You're right. Delete it.
Yeah.
So, ours has taken a lot we've changed it a lot on just like the flow. You should be able to open up the app, look at parking spots like that, right? And that's now what you're able to do. In other apps, same thing. Like Uber, even before you sign up, you see cabs and UberXs around, right? And that provides that, kind of like that salesy opportunity is to say, all right, now you see what we got, now you should sign up. And that's how we do it as well.
In the United States, there's a much more like well-defined path towards like success, financial security, a reputable job, that sort of thing. In a developing country, it's much less defined. There are a lot more entrepreneurs doing whatever it takes to build businesses and to try to survive. And their motivations in a way are like a lot less glamorous, right? Like there's, we like to talk in the States about like, and we do too, right? Like we love to invest in behind and with founders that have like this deep passion for this problem they're trying to solve. Like my dad was just trying to like survive, and he saw an opportunity and he would start businesses to try to capitalize on that opportunity. And, there's something about that scrappiness that is just different than, and I think this is true for a lot of immigrant founders, right? Like the scrappiness that exists as an immigrant that is just different. There's the willingness to kind of do whatever it takes, and to do whatever it takes in an environment or a context where you feel like you have no idea what you're doing or you're totally out of place.
I guess the toughest lesson is to realize that you're not going to be an overnight success, and you've got to be persistent. You've got to have grit. We talk about, we have our core values, which I can go either way on. They're kind of cliche at this point, and we tried to make ours as far from cliche as possible. But if I could pick one, it would be grit. Because so much about this game of startups and business creation and team creation is about grit. It is about being willing to do the things that other people aren't willing to do, being willing to hang on a little bit longer when most people would stop, and just being able to push yourself. And whether it's in sports or in startups or in business in general, most of the people that are successful have that, and it's definitely one of the things that we look for. Whenever I bring someone onto a team, I always say I'm only asking for two things: a positive attitude and an unparalleled work ethic. And if you can give me those two things, it's my job to put you in the best possible position to succeed, both personally and professionally.
For me, it's definitely an emotional thing. I think anyone that gets this far into a business is completely emotionally attached, right? It's what gets you up at 3 a.m. to get on a ferry to go to Nantucket to throw an event. I mean, you've got to be a little nuts and emotionally involved in it. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but there are strategic and financial decisions that have to be made that are completely non-emotional. And for me, it's about laying out strategic goals for the business and metrics for those successes. So if I can lay out a strategy and I can lay out goals and success metrics, I can make decisions that feel more black and white. So, and that feel necessary. You know, if you can point to, unfortunately, this decision has to be made because we have a goal of hitting, you know, X number of hosts by next year and we're just not going to get there. Or, there's so many decisions every day that have to be made that are critical decisions in a startup of this size and at this stage of growth, that I think having goals and metrics in place is the only way you can do it.
I'll tell you one of the single most sort of, I guess, inspiring lessons I learned was something where he wasn't even trying to teach me a lesson, but it was really about innovation, where we were driving home one day in a driving rainstorm. And, you know, once your windshield wipers get old, they kind of take a set and they smear on the windshield. Yeah. And then there's only the spot down the bottom that's clear. So my dad drove home like hunched over, peering out this one clear spot. And as we're pulling in the garage, he says to me, you know, there really ought to be a better way to design a windshield wiper. So, you know, I'm walking in the house. I thought, yeah, you know, somebody who really knows about windshield wipers and mechanical engineering ought to think about that. There's got to be a better way. That's not what my dad was thinking. And 2 weeks later, I remember walking by his desk in his study, and I noticed there was a patent application for a brand new windshield wiper design. And the lesson I got from that, and also from the way he taught his course at MIT, is that, look, if you have a good background in math and system theory, the domain doesn't matter. You can go into it and break it down and understand it and be creative in that domain. It doesn't matter, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, acoustics. All the governing equations are basically the same. And so you really shouldn't be afraid to look at areas that you might traditionally say, oh, that's outside my domain. And that, you know, and in fact, there's been some papers written that show that a lot of big breakthroughs in a field actually happen from someone outside that field because they bring a new perspective. So I think it's important not to be afraid to look outside your domain.
It's very important, in our opinion, is that you still meet face-to-face regularly. So right now, for example, one of our engineers who is working from Texas for us is here for a week in Boston. So we try to really have everybody in Boston regularly. And then we also try to bring either the whole company together. We will probably do that later this year, or at least parts of it. So for example, our support team will be working out of Boston for a week at the end of August. Our engineering team did that back in February, and we'll do that again in September in Vienna. So I think we do a lot of that, and that certainly helps a lot, because otherwise, and you can do a lot of things online, but I think really getting to know people, especially getting to know people personally and building a true relationship with your peers, I think that's only possible if you meet them in person.
And that's it, a piece of my favorite part from each of the first 15 episodes. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed the episode, I encourage you to subscribe on iTunes so you get all my new episodes as soon as they're released. And if you really loved the episode, I would love a review on iTunes. Once again, you can find all show notes at startupbostonpodcast.com, and you can reach me at nick@startupbostonpodcast.com. That's NIC@startupbostonpodcast.com. I'll see you next time for episode 2. Cheers.